This is Kim Newlove, host of the Pharmacist Voice podcast. Thank you for joining me for episode 91. I alternate solo shows and interview shows. The solo shows are about my career change from pharmacist to voice actor, and the interview shows feature a variety of people who use their voices to advocate, educate, or entertain. My website is thepharmacistvoice.com. Bill Purdy has spent a career refining his craft as a brand craftsman. He began his journey with Addison Whitney in 2006 as a senior consultant. He was a founding partner of CannonCassidy, a pharmaceutical, medical device, and consumer branding firm. Then he rejoined Addison Whitney in 2020 as Senior Vice President and Managing Director to expand the business and strengthen its team of branders. After nearly 30 years building brands, Bill brings process innovation, creative perspective, and best practices leadership to Addison Whitney, know-how that helps Bill and his team create brands that matter. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Bill Purdy. Hi, Bill. Welcome to the Pharmacist Voice podcast. How are you?
I'm great, Kim. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Good to have you on the show. I love the topic we're going to talk about. Can't wait to dive in. I'll hit you with the first question here. How do you use your voice in some way to advocate, educate, or entertain?
In the healthcare space, I'll talk specifically in the healthcare space. I use my voice to advocate for safety, being the cornerstone of brand. And by brand, I mean brand names, generic nomenclature, even clinical trial names. Above all other things, names should be safe. But I also use my voice to educate clients on the importance of brand for their business. Growing their business, talking to patients or clinicians, investors, how naming and branding can show confidence, how they can communicate their value. Brand has a role in all of that. And it's not just my voice, it's the voice of my company, Addison Whitney. Our tagline is the name of brand.
Well, I love that you use your voice in more than one way, and drug safety and drug naming has become a really interesting topic for me because I wrote a drug name pronunciation course. I would love it if you could walk me through the drug naming process.
Yeah, it's a challenging process. It usually starts where a client identifies an asset or a molecule that needs a brand name, and we give them guidance on putting together a key group of stakeholders that have insight into what the product is and what it's going to be in the marketplace. So we help them get different disciplines in the meeting. Usually there's a legal presence, there's a commercial presence, sometimes regulatory, sometimes drug information, and we get a deep understanding of what the product is, the science behind it, what's the mechanism of action, and then we probe further into, what are some of the emotional, functional, practical attributes of the product? How might the product be positioned in the marketplace against competitors? It's a pretty robust, strategic, and creative discussion. And then from that initial meeting, we devise a creative brief, and then our team goes to work on developing names individually as well as together as a team. And we create names, and then the names go through real rigorous regulatory screening. They go through legal analysis, linguistic analysis, and then we show them to the client. The client gives us feedback, and then we repeat the process. So it's a very iterative and strategic and creative process. And it can usually take several months to come up with multiple brand names for the product. But our work typically doesn't end there. The naming is one part of it, and that can oftentimes feed into part of our larger process, which is called the brand precept.
Ooh, what's the brand precept?
That's where we start to talk about brand story and narrative. Different channels where a product will live will have different voices. So we develop things, one thing we call the scientific house, the vernacular you use to describe a disease or a molecule. We get into visual identity, logo, package design, color palette, website, imagery. What's the proper imagery for the brand? Campaign development. So the brand precept is this strategic framework that we use that optimizes the insights, the ingredients, the expression of brand design. And it's grounded in purpose and narrative. And through collaboration, it aligns marketplace, customer, and brand in a meaningful and differentiated way. So it kind of transcends the name. And if we've done our job properly, the naming's one portion of it, but when we take the client through this brand precept, they'll have a tool that they can use down the road as they evolve the brand. And it's really how you build a brand the right way. And we have a brilliant creative director and a team of verbal and visual designers and strategists that innovated this process.
You said the magic word, team. There has got to be one heck of a team putting that together. You just named all kinds of different angles to look at a drug from the marketing to the advertising, the brand, the colors, the story. That is fascinating. Thank you for sharing that with me.
You're welcome.
All right, let's take a closer look. What makes a drug name appropriate or inappropriate or desirable or undesirable?
I would say, again, in the healthcare space, safety first. Above all else, it can't be confused with another product. It's a pretty tough guardrail. Then it must be unique. It must be ownable legally. Catchy is nice, memorable, something that evokes attributes of the product. And something that we say at Addison Whitney, weird is good. Names that are weird, especially in the pharmaceutical space, is a good thing. We've found that, and we've done some research internally, we found that 33% of the names the FDA approves have uncommon letter strings. 31% have phonetic alternatives. So that would be, like a PH for an F, or an X for a Z, or a Q for a C or a K sound. And 12% of names have double letters. And so at Addison Whitney, we did this research, and we do this research ongoing to find trends. Our entire organization, we are constant students of the industry and the craft, and we are inventing language. So we always need to be on our toes about what's going on, where's the white space, and how do we evolve the language.
Well, I've got to ask you, since we're kind of on the topic, how does a patient know how to pronounce those medications? I know that you are trying to be safe, but how does a patient know how to pronounce that medication, or a pharmacist?
That's a good question, because sometimes the pronunciation can evolve. What we try to do is, when we develop candidates, we have an intended pronunciation that we convey to the client. And then over time, that pronunciation is socialized. And then in the marketing communications, the pronunciation is obviously stated. But it's an important question, because there's always multiple ways to pronounce a name. In fact, one of the steps we get to, we do rigorous testing on name candidates. We test them for look-alike, sound-alike, and we create sound files on the pronunciation of the name to see if pharmacists or physicians or patients will misinterpret the name for something else. And when we do this in other languages, we do localized sound files. So if someone in Italy, for instance, is saying the name like someone who speaks Italian would say it, so we can uncover potential conflict with physicians in Italy. So the sound is an important component, and that's something that's socialized in the advertising and communications.
I know that when I listen to commercials on the radio or on television, I expect that that's the correct pronunciation. When you listen to that, do you feel like that's the correct pronunciation out of all the drugs that you've helped name?
Yes, we've usually gone to pretty great lengths to make sure that the name, as you hear it, is how it was intended. And a lot of times when we structure the name, we're making sure that it's created in such a way so that it wouldn't be confused or spoken in a different way.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's more important to get it right than be right. There's some people that are like, no, it's tomato. No, it's tomato. It's tomato. It's tomato, and there's regional dialects and whatever. And I know what you were saying with just now with the Italians pronouncing it a certain way and with their own accent. There are things that are unique to different parts of the United States: Southern accent, Northern accent. I live so far north in Ohio. I'm just like an hour away from Canada through Lake Erie. So I have like a partial Canadian accent. And what I'm trying to do is get the pronunciation right, not trying to be right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I'm trying
I
to
do.
do the Ohio pronunciation of whatever that commercial your company helped name the drug for is supposed to say.
Yeah.
Bill, what are some tools you use most often in your line of work?
Tools. We have a lot of different tools that we use. Um, the one that jumps to the top of my mind is something called POCA analysis. That stands for phonetic orthographic computer analysis. And that is a algorithm that was made public about 10 years ago, which helps identify a new name that you create and the potential for phonetic or orthographic similarity to another product on the market, which is really an important tool that we use to help gauge the initial safety of a name or whether or not the FDA would approve it. And we do this POCA analysis in the US, we do it in Canada, we do it in Europe with their databases to uncover conflict. So we use that as a tool. We use legal databases as a tool. We do STEM nomenclature searches to make sure stems of a generic name aren't embedded in a brand name. So there's a lot of databases and tools we use in that vein. Linguistic analysis is something that we do. We never know. As I mentioned earlier, we're inventing language. We have no idea what a name might mean in another dialect. So that's another tool that we use, linguistics, to make sure we're not offending someone. Market research. It's a huge tool that we use. It's a big component that informs our thinking. It ultimately helps validate a name, whether it will be confused. Do patients like it? Do physicians like it? And we have a really super research and insights team at Addison Whitney. But our biggest tool is probably our know-how. I know that may sound cheesy, but it's true. We know how to navigate the human dynamics. We know how to help build consensus. We know how to help define a vision and help the client get there. And that's decades of consulting on thousands of projects. Every situation is different, but if you've done 1,000 of them, you can adapt real time. And we're always looking for new tools and areas to innovate. But yeah, there's a lot of tools, and we're always looking to find new tools.
That was fascinating. One of the things that you talked about a little bit earlier was that drug names that are weird are safe and weird is good. I have a child with autism, and I've got to tell you, there's this thing out there that people with autism do, and they use synesthesia. They connect two things that don't normally get connected to produce an idea. For example, when they see the number 4, they get warm, or when they hear something, it causes them pain. So there's some good and some bad. But when I hear you talking about connecting all these things and inventing things and weird being good, I happen to think of that and how maybe you could use synesthesia or that concept to connect things. Maybe you already do, but put that in your toolbox.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. You touch on something that's integral to what it is we do. The way the human brain works, and this is the irony of the weird statement. While we're advocates for weird and things have to be weird to be different and to be legally viable, the way the human brain works is it goes to things it knows. So things that the brain can associate a word part or a sound with. While that's desirable, it also makes the name riskier because it's likely there's another product out there that has that similar sound or that similar letter string. So our challenge is, what can we come up with that creates that connection in the brain, but yet is unique? So that's why we're advocates for weird.
I just picture your team sitting around a table and putting letter combinations together. Do you guys ever open up the Scrabble box and just dump the letters and go at it?
Yeah, there's all sorts of different ways to kind of get the brain going. Some of the namers do that. I've done that on occasion. I've got a thesaurus here. I got a couple of different dictionaries. I got a Latin dictionary. There's all sorts of ways to get the brain going. And yeah, we do things individually. We do things as groups. You never know where you're going to come up with the unique idea.
Yeah, inspiration has got to come from all kinds of places for your team.
Indeed.
Yes. I'd love to be a fly on the wall. That's pretty cool stuff. I know that there's a lot of value in hiring a company to do this because you have a team. So tell me, what's the value of hiring a company such as Addison Whitney to name a drug?
Let's see. So we've created, I think, over 1,000 brands, and that's products, services, trials, variants, corporate identities, drugs, devices, and we've done over 500 names just in this prescription drug space. So I should have mentioned we do things in the consumer space as well, technology, medical device. And we know the process. We know the process to achieve safe and viable names. But also that other point that we were just talking about, how to build consensus. We can help avoid the pitfalls. Those three hoops or four hoops you jump through: the legal, the regulatory, the linguistic, and then human preference or consensus. That's usually the hardest one, getting people to align on what's the ideal brand for the product. Another reason to consider us is we've got the highest approval rate of any name in the industry. 87% of our names get approved by the regulatory authorities. And the rejection rates are well published. They're between 50 and 60% rejection rate at FDA and EMA. Some of our competitors claim to work on 70, 80, 90% of the brand names, which may be true, but we always ask ourselves, where are the rejections coming from? And so our 87%, we stand behind and we're quite proud of it. But to your question, experience, I think know-how and doing it with integrity. We're collaborators and we're building something purposeful and with meaning, and it's our culture. I always say we're a good fit for those that understand the complexity of naming, and it's a complex process, and we're a team of collaborators to help you get through it.
Congratulations on your success.
Thank you.
What are some myths around drug naming? What do you do versus what people think you do?
It's interesting. I think the biggest myth is everyone thinks it's easy, or they say, "Oh, that can't be that hard," when in fact it's quite challenging. Hindsight's 2020. When you see a brand name on TV, for instance, little do people know that name was probably the result of 1,000 names and 2 years of effort to get to that one name. So it's a balance of art and science over a long period of time typically to get that name. And the names are usually the result of the process. Rarely does a name jump off the page, or does someone say, "Hey, we're going to name it this." There's so many hoops you got to jump through that you have to go through this process to arrive at what the brand will be. And it's really the thoroughness of exploration that yields the best result. It rarely jumps off the page.
I can see how people would think it's easy. I have named 2 children. That was easy. Going through all the regulatory issues that you have to consider, I can imagine how there's a lot more to it than just opening up a baby name book and saying, that looks like Craig, that looks like Derek.
Indeed. Yeah, there's a lot of things to balance.
Any other myths you want to share with me?
Yeah, I think it's a marriage too, not just art and science, but it's people and machines. It's people coming up with names, our creative team coming up with names, applying, adhering to a creative strategy, but utilizing technology to screen the names with all the legal and regulatory, and certainly in the healthcare, the look and sound. We need technology to help us in this.
Definitely. Yes. Where would we be without computers these days? Yep. I don't mean to go negative on you here, but can you tell me about a time when you changed your mind about something really important in your line of work?
Um, you know, the last question you asked, our reliance on technology. I think it's something that has changed in the branding and the naming space. There's so many names, there's so many trademarks, there's so many platforms where names can live and trademarks can live. Social media, things like POCA analysis and AI. So POCA is kind of a form of AI, artificial intelligence, and so evolving AI. Anyone serious about naming needs to be moving in this area. As with most industries, you want to avail yourself of new technology. You need to innovate, but people are always the key. You need creative people. You need to love it, and we all do. And you want to avail yourself of different skill sets. Creative, legal screening, sales, strategy, linguistics, regulatory expertise, design, copywriting. There's a lot of different skill sets involved, and it takes a lot of hands on deck to make it happen.
Yeah, but can you tell me about a time when you changed your mind about something?
I guess I changed my mind about the need for technology. I used to think we could create a name and that was it, but we need technology to create it. So reliance on technology is the answer. That's what I've changed my mind about. I didn't think technology really was necessary, but it really is. It's an integral part of the process.
Oh, I get it now. Cool. Let's talk about your journey. How did you get into this line of work?
So I started my career almost 30 years ago as a promotional reviewer, which means I was a writer and an editor for a company, Glaxo, which is now GSK. And they had a real interesting process. Anytime anything was, any type of advertising piece went out, I had to go to a room with a marketing lead, a legal lead, a regulatory lead, a medical information or drug information lead, and all those disciplines sat around a table, and we would determine what went out, what it had to say, what legal fair balance was there. It was a really interesting process. From there, I went on to write continuing medical education and continuing pharmacy education programs. I ran an advertising agencies for a while. And then about 15 years ago, I interviewed for the position of a brand consultant at Addison Whitney. And it was kind of a natural evolution of what I always did. But instead of a 30-second TV spot or a 100-word print campaign or a 10,000-word monograph, I was focusing on one word. But those same disciplines were involved. I needed to understand the legal, the regulatory, the drug information, the commercial, in building the one word. And when I got to know the people at Addison Whitney, they all shared that love to create and problem solve. And it's a great organization. There's great talent, great culture, and I kind of got there. It's funny, you say, how did I get into this line of work? I just evolved into it. I don't think anybody sets out to be a namer. So I just kind of ended up here.
Yeah, I can't imagine in kindergarten you even knew what that was. Hey, when I grow up, I want to be a namer.
Although my 8-year-old now, she knows what daddy does and she's writing down names all the time. Can you use this? Can you use this? So she could be a future namer.
Oh, that's so sweet. Hey, Bill, I'm a pharmacist, and I know there's a lot of other pharmacists out there looking to do something else. So, how could somebody else do what you do?
That's interesting. I think overall, you need curiosity. You need to have a bit of a creative bent, but love of language, communicating ideas. Again, we are creating language. Um, it's exciting, but it's like I said, it's not just naming. When we think of brand, there's so many outlets: writing, strategy, visual identity, design, mechanical design of a package, video production, campaign creation, website creation, virtual environments, physical branding of space. There's so many ways to get into branding. Pharmacists are a huge part of what we do. We've got pharmacists on staff that to give us some regulatory expertise. We use pharmacists all the time for the name validation that names go through. When we do the look and sound research, we're tapping into pharmacists all the time. They interact with so many different brand names. They're going to help us with that guardrail of safety. They're going to say, yep, this sounds like this product, or hey, this could be heard like this. So we tap into pharmacists all the time. And I encourage anyone who's interested in branding to think about it, either from the safety perspective, helping with the testing, or from the creative perspective. The list goes on. If you like to create and collaborate, you could be a brander.
That's cool. That sounds like such a cool job. And I'm happy for you that you get to do this job that you love with a team that really works well together. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a great job. I love what I do.
Bill, is there anything else you'd like to share as we wrap this up?
If any of your listeners want more information on Addison Whitney and branding, check us out on www.addisonwhitney.com. Thanks for having me, Kim.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you, and have a great weekend. Thank you for listening to episode 91 of the Pharmacist Voice podcast. Please visit thepharmacistvoice.com to subscribe and read the show notes.